There we go. And so we already have people joining us. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome. Good to see everybody. We're happy to hear where you're from. If you want to use the chat to let us know where you're joining from. Looks like we have people from all over based on the names.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see the names, old friends, new friends, people we'd love to get to know from all over the world. I know for some of you, the time is not so convenient, so you might be here in the middle of the night. For those of you who have friends and family who want to see this, we will record and it will be available perhaps at a more convenient time for others. So that's the possibility, but we're always happy to see so many people joining us live.
Yeah, so we see Brazil and Colombia and the Philippines. Great, and all over the US.
Bali, Canada, Indonesia, Hong Kong.
Wow. Wow, some people are
Oh, awesome is
really
this.
I think I
Really?
recognize the name of one of my old students from Newcastle, Australia.
Oh, nice.
How cool.
And South America, we've got Ecuador and Brazil and Peru and
India.
At Argentina. Yay.
Oh, wow.
So Marco, you tell us
Welcome,
when
everybody.
you start the Facebook feed. You let us
And
know.
we are already on Facebook. Hello, Facebook. And we can start whenever you're ready. Suzanne, Zoe, Shelley, thank you so much.
all
Okay,
right.
and just one
thank
of
you.
the participants wanted to verify that they were muted, and yes, you are all muted. And we'll let you know how you can ask questions as we go. So go ahead, Suzanne, sorry.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. We try our best to stay on time. And as you guys know, you're joining us for the Theory Tuesdays webinar series, where we highlight topics that inform us for air sensory integration theory. And these are being hosted by Classy, and I'm Dr. Suzanne Smith Rowley. I'm with Dr. Zoe Mayu, who will, I guess, moderate. And I do want to acknowledge the contributions from Southpaw Enterprises. They have been an amazing partner over many, many decades with sensory integration equipment and products, and they have very generously helped to support these webinars. So Zoe, you want to introduce
Okay,
our
sure. Well, these wonderful series that Suzanne has so carefully and competently put together, inviting some of the most amazing people in our community who also happen to be very good friends of ours, many of them. And so you all can read the amazing accomplishments of Dr. Shelley Lane. But I was thinking, Shelley, gosh, we've known each other a very long time. I think you and Suzanne have known each other even longer. We're not going to talk any dates. We don't want to admit to any of that.
No early stories and no early dates.
No dates. But I was just thinking that Shelley Lane is truly one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. And at the same time, one of the most humble and just quietly competent. Everything that she ever does is always with so much care and careful deliberation, but of such high quality. And I just want to thank you, Shelley. I mean, we could go on and on about who you are and what you're doing and what you've published and accomplished. But you do everything with so much grace and care. And we are so lucky to have you in our sensory integration family. And we're really honored that you're joining us tonight to talk about one of our most favorite topics ever, play. So without taking up any more time, Dr. Shelley Lane.
Well, and before Shelley, you
yes,
get
sorry.
started, I do want to encourage everybody to stay until the end because tonight we have 2 raffles. Okay, so those of you who are present all the way till the end, you will be eligible for one of those 2 raffles. So just don't leave too soon if you can stay. So, okay, Shelley, take it away.
And
Oh, thank
sorry,
you.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Shelley. We just keep
Eventually, we'll let you
interrupting
talk,
I don't
Shelley.
want to do that. Eventually. Just want to say that if people want to make questions, use the Q&A to make those questions, and we'll try to deliver the questions to Dr. Shelley Lane at the end. But don't use the chat. Use the chat to interact. Use the Q&A for questions. And thank you, Shelley. There you go.
Thank you for your kind words. It is a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk about the neuroscience, really, of anything. But tonight, it will be the neuroscience of play. And I had changed the title a little bit from what it was advertised as, because really all we're going to have time for today is a glimpse into the neuroscience of play. All right, so the characteristics of play and playfulness. We start with talking about social interaction and engagement between players, because when we think about what play is, it really is about that interface between the 2 people involved in the play. It captures them deciding what they want to do. They are able to develop their own parameters, their own rules around what they do. They're driven by their internal drive or their motivation to engage. And from which they get some sort of reward. But play isn't goal-oriented. Play is the reward that we get from play is intrinsic. And you will hear more details on play and playfulness from Anita Bundy in a later webinar. All right, so next slide, Suzanne. Or are you advancing?
No, I'm doing it, yeah.
Okay.
Just let me know.
All right. And then the next slide as well. So when I started to look into the neuroscience of play, as I said, I'm intrigued by the neuroscience of everything. But the neuroscience of play was something that I had actually never really considered looking into. And yet when I started to do that, there's a fair bit of literature on the neuroscience of play. And it tends to always start with, what is the function of play? What we know about play is that from insects to humans, there's evidence that we all play. And in spite of the fact that we all play, play is a risk in and of itself, because play expends energy that you may need to save for something else. Play takes up time. Play could be distracting in the face of a potential danger. And there's always the risk of injury. So we have to ask ourselves then, is there an evolutionary or developmental benefit? Suzanne, you want to play that video? This is one of the things that makes me laugh. Because who would think of animals playing with balls, these kind of animals playing with balls, maybe dogs, maybe cats, but cows and bulls and chickens. And they get very engaged with the ball, and the ball serves as a reward in and of itself. So in spite of the fact that I said that from insects to humans, I didn't find any pictures of insects playing. All right. So what does that have to do with neuroscience? Well, that really just makes me laugh. So, and laughter is core and central to play. So it's a good way to get things started. But what does play do for the brain? The first thing is that it helps us develop behavioral flexibility. And if I've learned nothing in my existence, it is that behavioral flexibility is the key to getting to being okay in multiple different environments, because it helps us meet the demands of an ever-changing environment. And it also drives us to create new and different solutions to both social and physical challenges that we encounter in everyday life, but certainly that we encounter in play. It also supports our ability to build adaptability and flexibility, so we aren't stuck in a rut with our behavioral responses to a variety of different situations. And there is some evidence that it does help us to develop the skills that we need as an adult. And those of you who have children at home or children in your clinic, you'll know that adult-like play is very commonly seen. And it is thought that that is a foundation for what we can do as adults. Next slide. So play is essential to social competence and social emotional intelligence. Supporting typical play is related to practice, to repeated trials of interaction and reaction. Play also gives us an identity. It's about who I am and who you are. And we learn about our abilities, our challenges, and about the abilities and challenges of others. In general, kids become more involved in activities that are play-like rather than activities that are not play-like. And in those play-like behaviors, we reflect emotional well-being. So play is at the center also of emotional well-being relative to engaging in another activity or the same activity where it isn't play at all. So we get social competence, social emotional intelligence, and a foundation for social relationships. Next slide. Oh, and play may reduce stress. So one of the really important pieces of a question that Suzanne had asked me is, why do we play? What does it do for our happiness lifelong? And part of it is that play has been shown to reduce stress and support maintenance of social interaction. So if there's anything in your life that you can do to reduce stress, do it by all means. Well, my dog's just decided to join us. She'll leave in a minute. Play is also key for typical development across multiple domains: social, emotional, cognitive, and motor. I think we oftentimes don't think of the widespread impact that play can have on our developmental domains. Play supports development of higher level brain functions. So not just that basic cause and effect, but rather play plays the whole brain process. And I think I have this on another slide, but it supports development at all levels of the brain. And as I already mentioned, it guides us to develop a self-identity. Next slide. So one of the really important components of play is this social interaction. And the foundation for social interaction is in mother-infant attunement or bonding. And this is where we lay the groundwork for the development of emotional regulation and broader speaking brain development. Literature tells us that the responsiveness of moms in the first year of life influences cognition and executive functions when measured in the second year. And we can very likely extrapolate that to impact our cognitive and executive functions throughout life. What we know also about play is that we don't see play during periods of high stress, high anxiety, periods of hunger or illness. We don't play when we don't feel safe. And playful behavior then takes place when we do feel safe and we can express those characteristics of internal control, intrinsic motivation, being free to suspend reality, because that really is what play is about, and being able to give and receive cues about how the play and playful interaction will transpire. Next slide. So it is a whole brain thing, absolutely 100% a whole brain thing. So we're not going to be able to get into the details of brain regions that we associate with these functions that I've just talked about to any depth, but we will talk about some key brain regions that are involved with play and playfulness. Next slide. So play and playful behaviors depend on context, as I've just said, but they impact or rely on physical, sensory, motor development, social interaction, emotional regulation, motivation, adaptability and flexibility, and executive functions. If we unpack this slide a bit and start down here with the physical and sensory motor play, movement is considered to be the gas that powers play. So from an SI perspective, movement and play and the integration of sensation happen all together. Movement is itself considered a very basic form of play. And the structure that has recently captured my intense attention relative to play, but relative to many other functions, is in fact the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is a structure, as you probably know, that's core to movement. And it is a structure where we not only have planning and sequencing of praxic behavior, but we have there multi-sensory integration and processing. So tapping into cerebellar functions makes a great deal of sense. How do we do that? The cerebellum is receives massive amounts of somatosensory input. So there are 3 pathways to the cerebellum from proprioceptors in the body. And there's a pathway to the cerebellum from proprioceptors in the face. So we get massive amounts of somatosensory, but it also carries touch. And this information then lays a foundation for motor learning, motor control, and motor planning. It's important for us to note that play differs in boys and girls. And we see more motor related play, running around kinds of things in boys. And we see more rough and tumble play in boys and more running around behaviors in girls. But it's all driven by the sensory motor integration that begins in the cerebellum. The cerebellum doesn't just get proprioception. Cerebellum has a reciprocal relationship with the vestibular system. And this then supports the role of posture, balance, head position in space, visual tracking relative to play and movement through space. The cerebellum also has a reciprocal relationship with the reticular formation, which also contributes to posture and balance and is a foundation for coordinated movement. But the reticular formation is itself a multisensory integrative center. It receives sensation from every sensory system. And relative to the context that we're talking about, it relays information on vision and sound to the cerebellum. It serves as a region where we integrate information from the cortex with information from the spinal cord, and all of that gets projected to the cerebellum. The cerebellum then has also a reciprocal relationship with the cortex. So that relationship is the foundation for feed forward and feedback, which I know that you have related to Praxis. And feed forward and feedback are core to our ability to engage with the environment in a playful way. The cerebellum is thought to build models based on repeated behaviors. In this case, if we're talking about play and playfulness, the cerebellum builds play and playful models that go well beyond motor or even the integration, multisensory integration, to include social and emotional processes. The links between the cerebellum and regions of association cortex. So association cortices are adjacent to primary sensory cortex, and they generally function to allow for a higher level of analysis of whatever the information is. The association cortex cerebellar link is a connection between sensory input and behavior. It's thought to lay a foundation for creativity and imagination. It also is a source of memory and emotional responses that are both conscious and unconscious. So unconscious emotional responses are linked to autonomic nervous system arousal and other automatic aspects of emotion. Conscious emotional responses are those that are related to specific emotional expression. And the connection between the cerebellum and association cortex is the connection that gives us a foundation for emotional regulation. Being able to engage in successful social interaction also requires that we are able to understand emotion in others, both positive and negative, and that social interaction piece is a part of cerebellar cortical interactions. Before we got started here, Suzanne was talking a little bit about dopamine. And dopamine is certainly linked to play, because you'll remember that dopamine is a neurotransmitter released by a couple of different brainstem nuclei, but it's the neurotransmitter that's involved in pleasure and reward pathways. And it has a role in internal drive, in intrinsic motivation. Dopamine is released during play, and it gets involved in our sense of reward from play and pleasure in playing. As an aside, some of the medications that our kids are on, for instance, Ritalin, actually reduce dopamine availability, and as a result can have a negative impact on kids' ability to play, which makes your job as their therapist a little more challenging. In addition to dopamine, play taps into our endogenous opioid systems. So receptors for opioids are found in the cortex, in limbic system, in brainstem, in midbrain. And they lay a foundation for enjoyment. But if they're overactivated, they actually reduce playful engagement. And the thinking on this is that the opioid system may be a mediator of play and playful engagement. And when there's too much activation, it's as though this system helps us say, oh, wait a minute, I need a break when it's functional. Play could probably be said to involve all neurotransmitters, but the last one I'll talk about is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter that's involved in the balance of engagement and disengagement with a task. So whether we are all in or we've decided to disengage. Interestingly, engagement is also linked to the inherent challenge of a task. So when we think about how important it is to provide the just right challenge, it's that just right challenge that helps us engage the norepinephrine system. When the challenge becomes too simple or too hard, we no longer activate that norepi system and we disengage. So we need to think about our clinical interventions and what we're doing and how it's playing out. So the context for play crosses all the way from the very core, the very lowest regions of the brain, up through the very highest, the association cortices. Thinking a little bit about internal drive, a little bit more, having the capacity to find joy in life is in fact essential to well-being. And having the capacity to find joy is where we have internal drive. It is implicated in our ability to experience pleasure. The internal drive implicates regions of the prefrontal cortex that are associated with limbic functions, along with a myriad of other limbic structures. Being able to tap internal drive is related in many ways to this social interaction aspects of play and playfulness. And you see listed up there limbic structures, dopamine, and endogenous opioid peptides, again, because the social reward system relies on the dopamine nucleus, in the ventral tegmentum, but also with its connections to things like the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus and regions of the prefrontal cortex, so that our ability to experience a sense of pleasure relies on those cortical structures as well as subcortical structures. Next slide. What happens when play is restricted? What happens when kids can't play? And some interesting literature suggests that even as short of play restriction as missing morning recess can have an impact on playful behavior. And the impact is termed rebound play. So for those kids who miss their breaks, their playful interaction breaks through a school day, they play intensely when they get a chance. And intensely can translate to not always acceptable within the context of that environment. So even very short play restrictions can negatively impact behavior. Longer term impacts of play deprivation include negative impacts on social interactions later in life, poor emotional regulation, and a negative impact on cognitive development. And given those negative impacts, we should double down on our efforts to incorporate play into everyday activity, particularly for young animals, of which humans are a part. But interestingly, there's also literature on adults. And what this literature tells us is that with continued play, we see a reduction of disorders such as dementia, cardiovascular disease, and neurological disorders. So play is key throughout the lifespan for well-being. Play deprivation, in contrast, in adults has been linked with mental health concerns such as a dark mood, depression, anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure, and a loss of optimism. So from this, we have to take the importance of play home. All right, so I think I will stop yammering now and open this up to questions.
Do we have any questions yet, Marco, from the group? Otherwise, I'll ask something.
We don't have any questions yet.
So we'll just remind
But if you have
our
some,
participants to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. And while we're waiting for some to be added, Shelley, I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about brain changes at adolescence and you know how that how that might affect the changes that we see. It seems like, you know, we see this like phase of trying to be cool, not wanting to seem silly. So just wondering if you might speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, you know, there's some literature on the hormonal changes induced by adolescence that impact, that can, not, they aren't, it's not always going to happen, but it can negatively impact your sense of freedom to suspend reality and your, I don't think it impacts intrinsic motivation or inner drive so much as it impacts the comfort with engaging in frivolous activity. And so I think for us, it's incumbent on therapists who work with adolescents to find a way to build play into their life. And it doesn't have to be playing ball like the animals did, but rather a way to impart enjoyable activities that are in fact stress reducing, anxiety reducing, an outlet that, you know, it's like the things that we've talked about forever. We all need a stress outlet. Maybe for these adolescents, it will be something very different than it will be for you. But in order to continue to support the core kernels of play, that social interaction and emotional connection and just physical activity, all three of which have been shown in multiple other contexts to be crucial for brain health. We have to meet them where they are, which may not always be a comfortable space for us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. You just brought up so much good food for thought. Some of these ideas about evolution and survival and
Yeah.
the role with distraction. I could go on and on, but it looks like we actually now have quite a few questions. So I'll let.
But I just wonder if I could jump in here just real quick,
Yeah.
because a lot of these are about adolescents and adults and
Yeah.
the intervention with that. And I just want to come at it from an infant perspective. I mean, I have so many ideas from your presentation, Shelley, which was so fabulous. Is, in infancy, in typical kids, you see this little bubble emerge, where they just start to chuckle about something and smile with their caregivers, and they find something funny, and you start to have those interactive games like peekaboo, where they think, oh, that's pretty fun. And I know my little grandbaby, I was just dropping cups into water and she was full belly laughing at the surprise of that. And so much of that, that perceptual knowledge, her ability to feel safe and comfortable. I saw your references to Jaak Panksepp, who I love his work. Just having that, that regulatory function intact, where they feel safe, they're clean, they're fed, and then they're perceiving things in the environment that they find fun and interesting, as well as interacting with their caregivers. And we see that, there's a poverty of that in some of the children that we see that have autism. Now, maybe not necessarily other diagnostic groups, they might still, have that play, but somehow that perceptual interaction, I think, is a little impoverished. And then as we go, get older and older and older, if they're not figuring out how to use their bodies, how to deal with objects in a fun way, how to negotiate other people and all of that. Again, we talk about a lot of mental health issues, but I do wonder about that. I mean, and so one more connection, which on the last webinar we had Diane Parham and Connie Lillis, who talked about the impact with sensory reactivity, self-regulation, and toxic stress. And certainly you referred to that's definitely a barrier, and and the cascade of impact of that. So play seems like it's really, really an important topic as an anecdote to some of that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that play has those risk factors that I talked about initially. And I think for some kids, that some of what keeps them from being able to play is that they do perceive constant threat in the environment. They do have an internalized sense of fear of injury, and that is probably prompted by an external context. But we have to be able to recognize and figure out how to get past that in order to have that environment that you're talking about, Suzanne, that supports play.
Mm-hmm. To have that freedom. Okay, well, I'll let you get to the participant questions. I don't know if you want us to.
We have a lot of questions here, and some of them are exactly about this. When we have different populations with different needs, and people are talking about kids with autism, kids with motor differences, motor disabilities. In that case, how can we use play to help them in their development, but also adapt maybe to allow them to play because it's such an important occupation? Any comments on that? Any ideas where to start, where to look for, or what to look for?
Relative to autism, one of the characteristics, of course, of autism is that social challenges with social interaction. And when I think about that, I think about the constructs that are inherent in something like floor time, which actually has you socialize with the child at their level, where their comfort zone is, where their sense of safety is. And for kids who are socially disconnected, I think we need to start with making them feel safe. Some of the work that I did when I lived in Virginia with kids preschoolers who had been traumatized by horrible ways. So by the age of 3, they were experiencing the effects of trauma. And our starting point for those kids was always safety, their safety and the safety of their peers, really, because some of those trauma-induced reactions to what would seem like nothing in the environment put their peers at risk. So sometimes we have to start with social interaction at a really low level, and sometimes we have to start with something, I think, even more basic, and that is a sense of safety. For kids with physical limitations, I think it makes our job harder because we have to really capitalize on our ability as OTs to adapt and grade, adapt the environment, grade the task, and yet still make it be the just right challenge, still make it be sufficiently challenging that we can tap into that dopamine reward system, not so challenging that norepinephrine shuts it down. It makes our job challenging, but it also makes our job crucial because we have the skill set to do that. And other adults in their environment may or may not. I had a nephew with a really severe neuromotor disorder. He passed away, but his mom used to yell at me about all of the OTs who were focused only on, can he hit the switch? Can he hit the switch? Can he hit the switch? And the switch wasn't connected to anything that was playful. I mean, how many times can you hit the switch and watch the teddy bear beat the drum? You know, yeah, it's fun once, but it's not social interaction. It's not anything that's going to support emotional regulation. We have to go beyond that. Okay, off the soapbox.
Well, and I'm just scrolling through the questions, and one of the questions that I have is who gets to decide what play is? But along that line, what about iPads and technology, and what about that? Is that play if children enjoy it, and how does that impact development?
Well, it impacts the development of thumbs. And there somewhere I read a study that showed that the homunculus, the sensory and motor homunculus for thumbs, had increased in size based on use. It's not social, is not gonna support emotional regulation in a way that we would expect it to be generalizable. So entertainment is different from play and playful interaction. It's entertainment, and honest, I'm a mom, I get it. Sometimes you need to entertain your kids, and you need to do it in a way that releases you from face-to-face interaction. But it can't, it's not, I don't think it's play. I should qualify that. It's a tool, it's a strategy.
Yeah. Well, And I think that, you know, there's other questions about ABA, and is that, you know, do those behavioral approaches go against the neuroscience you discussed? I'm reading the question.
Yeah. You know, ABA doesn't focus on play. ABA focuses on isolated skill development, which may or may not be generalizable. It is oftentimes reward-based, but the reward is an extrinsic reward, not an intrinsic reward. So ABA certainly taps into some areas of the nervous system, but the network and the connectivity that will be activated through an ABA approach will be very different from what is activated through a play or playfulness approach.
Kelly, one of the things you were saying something about meeting the child where they're at, and you know, I think when you were talking about the Just Right Challenge, and I always feel that that's something that's so important about OT, to respect the individual for what's important to them, what's meaningful, and where they're at. And it's so tied together with the Just Right Challenge. If a child can interact with some repetitive behaviors or scripts, and that's where they're at, I think we celebrate that. That's where we meet them to engage in a way that's joyful and playful.
I agree wholeheartedly. As long as you can find a way into a social connection that supports emotional interaction, that you've made great strides.
Oh, here's another question. Marco, I'll just do this, and I might have interrupted. I'm seeing in preschools post-COVID, the children are all playing at parallel play level, whether they are 2 or 6. What would be helpful for the teacher?
I think the teacher needs to revise the context in which the kids are playing and find an approach that engages you know, it can be just one child with one child, it can be a small group, but a way that encourages that social interaction, which they missed for 2 years because of COVID. And those 2 years are, you know, important years. 2 years at my age, 2 years when you're 2 is huge. And so they've lost that time. And, you know, when skills are delayed, and we can reintroduce them, but when we introduce 2-year-old activities, now that the child is 4 years old, the brain is in a different place. The connectivity patterns have shifted from what they might have been at 2. So we may have to work harder and work longer to create the right context for kids to socially engage. But you can start really basically with, you know, just, oh, I need this thing from you, and can I help this child engage with that child to get it? I mean, that in a pattern that starts with parallel play and has moments of social engagement might be the best way to start, depending on the level of the child. Knowing, however, that the brain's in a different place than it would have been 2 years ago.
And Shelley, what you said about safety really resonated. You know, when you were talking about safety with the children who'd had trauma, I was thinking about how much we emphasize safety in the sensory integration approach and how important that was to Dr. Ayers. And, you know, it seems like that's overlapping as well with the post-pandemic situation. Adults were so anxious, and everybody was so anxious and fearful, and, you know, maybe some increased recognition about making safe places and safe times for interaction is also important for all of us to be thinking about.
I think that's really important, Zoe. I'm glad you said it, because it also makes me think that we have to think safety from multiple lenses. So in an SI clinic, my first gut is to make sure it's physically safe, but we also need for it to be socially safe and emotionally safe. And those are harder to pin down.
Yeah, I find a lot that I'm talking to teachers about play and social play in a way that it's different than they're talking about it, because they're talking about play as work, feeding the baby, driving the truck, and then, oh, they do parallel play. Well, are they doing the same thing as the child alongside them? No, but they're in proximity. Well, in my mind, that's not really parallel play. That's just proximity, being in proximity. But moving from that idea of observing what someone else is doing and doing it yourself and seeing what you got, that's what you've got, that's what I've got. And then you have to start negotiating in terms of collaboration and establishing social hierarchies. And I mean, that's where we want to go, is where, children start to find their place within their cohort, within their family, within their peers, within their community. And I think that
Yes.
that sensibility has gotten somewhat reduced in terms of the expectations.
Yeah. And what's really sad, I think, is that, and I said this earlier, but the very things that we know that support brain health throughout the lifespan are the very things we're talking about here relative to play in young children. And we have a hole in that now because of COVID that we need to work. The kids don't need to work. It's work for us to create a pathway that guides the development of, physical activities, certainly, but also reduction of anxiety, reduction of stress, social interaction, emotional regulation. And it's a challenge. It's a bigger challenge now than it was 3 years ago.
Arif has an interesting question. What impact to children when we give them activities without playfulness?
They might learn some skills if they stick with it. But then, the comment that I made about an activity that is play versus the same activity in the context of not play, with, imposed rules and structure that take away from the playfulness that's inherent or potentially inherent. We don't get the same benefit. We don't get the same emotional benefit. We don't get the same social interaction benefit, may or may not get the same sensory motor benefit. But you certainly miss two of the big three.
Well, and if you teach them how it's fun, that it can generalize, right? Then they're much more likely to do it elsewhere versus just doing an exercise with you and then going, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah, right. I mean, how many of us like to do sit-ups?
Another interesting question is about the impact of prenatal alcohol. I'll expand it to drug exposure. What about addiction or substance exposure in utero, and does that impact play development?
Yes, I would say it does. I'm not as up on that literature, but keep in mind that prenatal exposure to alcohol, or take your pick on drugs, changes the brain chemistry. And if it changes the brain chemistry, it changes brain organization and neural connectivity. So it's going to change how the basic neural networks and the more advanced neural networks in the brain work with each other. So just based on that trajectory, I would have to say absolutely 100%. There will be differences in how playful kids are, and in the skills that they have inherent in their own being to engage in play and social interaction.
Here's a neuro question. Can you comment on how decreased cerebellar function impacts initiation of physical exploration of a child's environment or gross motor movement?
Decreased cerebellar function,
function.
cerebellar damage, or, and so, you know, when you've got damage, it's a game changer, obviously. And the best we can hope for when there's clear insult is a workaround. But the intrinsic mechanisms of the cerebellum are really, really complex. And there are lots of opportunities for workarounds. If you're talking about something like cerebellar hypoplasia, thermal hypoplasia, it will impact all of the functions that I talked about with the cerebellum, particularly though the sensory motor functions. And so what will need to happen, I think, is that you'll have to figure out ways to develop compensatory mechanisms. So, you know, maybe that means shifting to more vestibular inputs rather than relying so heavily on somatosensory inputs, shifting to making sure that the reticular formation is receiving multisensory inputs and coping with the integration process there. You might need to shift to some more cortical functions, more cortically driven activities. All of those would be inadvertently or advertently geared towards changing connectivity in the cerebellum, knowing that our powers there will be somewhat limited.
Well, I see another one up. I mean, I'll just keep going. We just probably have enough time for maybe one or two more, but this is a question. I see some kids easily transition from one play activity to another. Some see it as a distraction, but is it something negative? If kids go from one thing to another, what's your thought on that?
You know, there's an expectation for attention to task, to play even when kids bounce from, I have in my head a videotape of a little girl who had been diagnosed with ADHD, and literally she bounced from one activity to another without actually fully engaging in it. So there is a piece of play and playfulness that requires that you get that whole brain engaged, and engaged in a way that pulls other people in to the play and allows you to, for lack of a better word, play it out to a certain extent. What's the magic duration? I don't know. I don't have that. I know it's longer than about 10 seconds.
And last question, what about those kids who have, they have play interests, but they're severely restricted? So they seem to do the same things over and over and over and over.
So if you do it exactly the same over and over and over and over, then it's called perseveration instead of engagement. And I think what you need to figure out is what is being, why are you staying engaged in an activity that isn't probably continuing to be the just right challenge or provide you with rewards? There's some other feature of that engagement that is in itself intrinsically rewarding. And I think we need to figure that out. But, you know, Suzanne, you're a better clinician than I ever will be.
Oh.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think sometimes our clients have an impulse to do something and they're profoundly dyspraxic. And so the default is they do something kind of self-stimulatory.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of at a base level, and then they might do that repetitively because that's somehow soothing. But I think our job as clinicians then is to broaden the repertoire of interest, of possibilities, to help them know what those are, to give them, picture books of things that, and, samples and buckets of things that they can choose from that then expand their repertoire of play, because sometimes they actually just haven't been given permission or access to
Opportunity,
things
yeah.
that could be more than what they're able to do on their own.
And to piggyback on those really astute comments, I think one of the things we also have to be careful of is making significant changes in the behavior. It needs to be gradual, it needs to be subtle, but also remember that the cerebellum builds up models for action based on subtle changes in how things are done. So though that subtlety will, I think, play a role there.
Yeah, I think respect the individual and understand and try to move from there. Well, Shelley, one other question was, what do adults do to play? And I'm just going to call this is what's fun for me. So I think we get together on occasion and talk about research and neuroscience and neurosensory integration. And so for me, this is my part of my adult play.
Yeah, well,
And-
we socially engage.
Yeah.
And to build on that, I want to thank our participants too. We have such an amazing group of people from all over the world who joined us, including Dr. Sue Knox, who's an expert in play. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Sue Knox is with us. Thank you for joining, and thank you to everyone. So go ahead, Suzanne, and let us know what's coming up, and then let's get to our
Yeah.
prizes.
Well, join us for the next time we get together to play in our our Brainiac world and talking and thinking about sensory integration. As Shelley mentioned, our next date in August, it's going to be Dr. Anita Bundy going more in depth on play. You can tell that we have a big value for this, and we really value our experts who have done the deep dive in this topic. In September, we will have, I hope I don't get it out of order, but I think it's Dr. Sharon Cermak, who's going to be talking about DCD and dyspraxia and her findings in research, where she found sensory modulation concerns in that population, and that's not frequently been identified. So she'll talk about her research and dyspraxia. And then Sarah Schoen will be, I believe it's October, talking about multisensory contributions to postural and motor control and its impact on emotional development. And then our finale is Dr. Roseanne Schaaf, who's going to talk about research to theory to practice. So how do we continue to generate research that supports our understanding? So that's our series. So mark it down on your calendar. We've got a good lineup, but Shelley, thank you so much.
Don't forget the prizes.
Yeah, well, I'm
Before-
not getting there. Okay, there's also webinars by the International Council for Education and ASI. They've got some coming up. They're beautiful. They're also free about clinics around the world. So tune in, and I think those are recorded and available on their website. The Brazilian Congress, the International Sensory Integration Congress, is coming up in Rio in October. Come join us. And now, yes, and don't forget to sign up for the whole program and sensory integration. And now the raffle. Okay, and I turn it over.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we have two winners on this webinar. We're giving away a Easy Starter Kit and a Southpaw equipment. It's a gift card. You can choose your equipment. The Easy Starter Kit winner is Jennifer Salomon. Congratulations, Jennifer. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Jennifer. And the Southpaw winner is Catarina Aquino. And I believe I could say this in Portuguese, but parabéns, Catarina. Katerina is there. Look at that.
Oh, congratulations.
Great. Well, thanks to
Congratulations to
everyone
both
for
of you.
joining us, and thank you, Shelley. This is an
Yes.
amazing topic, so thank you
Yeah, and I
so
will
much.
put together a reference list for people.
Okay, well,
thank
we'll
you.
share it. And
Yeah,
thank
there's
you to our
a lot of
classy
questions.
team that makes this possible.
Oh, yes.
So have a good summer. Make sure to
Mhm.
play. Enjoy yourselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thank
Thanks.
you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you so
Bye.
much to all of you.
So are you